The military has carried out a coup d'etat in Myanmar. They've seized control.
British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has said that the killing of unarmed civilians
leader Aung San Suu Kyi.
Protests in Myanmar again turning deadly. Police there have reportedly opened fire on protesters in the city of Mandalay, killing one man. Police are also using rubber bullets and stun grenades.
March for democracy. Save Myanmar. Pray for Myanmar. For many of us, spring is the time for new lives, for the new starts, all green and lively. However, in this place, spring is painted in red, in blood, and in death. The military coup of Myanmar, the power given to protect the lives of its people, has been turned against the Burmese. Under the brutal violence, the people of Myanmar suffer. Why and how would a country's armed forces point a gun at its own people? What is happening in Southeast Asia's largest country? In the center of the violent suppression of the military stand the youth of Myanmar. The so-called Generation Z, born in the mid-1990s, is leading the momentum of the Burmese protests for democracy. This new generation has wielded their power by using a very different type of weapon from their parents' generation, smartphones and social media. In 1988 and 2007, their parents had to undergo great suffering, being completely isolated from the outer world during the military junta's suppression. In 2021, however, the post-millennials are neutralizing bullets with their thumbs. What would be the good reasons for the Generation Z of Myanmar to choose social media as their primary choice of weapon in this fight for democracy? A Burmese national in Gwangju told us,
Generation Z have been on the front lines. We call the front line of the fight for democracy by risking their lives to protect the protesters. But the violent crackdown occurred and more people are dying every day. Most of Generation Z grew up with this modern technology. So they have been using social media platforms to spread information across the country and the world. They are trying to tell the world and ask for help our country using social media as an indirect weapon. These social media can not only organize their activities, but also can share and spread the evidence of military's brutality to the world.
This year, the spring of Myanmar has been filled with screams and horror. The end of the suffering is yet nowhere to be seen. However, the people of Myanmar are rising with their thumbs up. Will the Burmese take their spring back? Here is the story of their fight for their spring, for democracy. GFN's special documentary for the 41st anniversary of May 18th Democratization Movement, March for Democracy, Part 1, Save Myanmar. Myanmar is known by another name among the travelers, the country of the gold. However, 3 months into the aftermath of the military coup, the golden color of the country has been slowly turning to blood-stained red as the innocent lives of the Burmese have been lost while voicing what their country should stand for: democracy. A Burmese human rights organization said since the coup d'etat on February 1st, the military has taken over 740 lives and more than 3,000 have been injured. The death toll is still rising at this very moment with the worsening situation there. Imagine risking your own life for what should be granted. What would it cost and what would it look like? What we have found out was worse than we have ever imagined. Here is Somotu, chief of the Korean branch of the Committee Against Myanmar Military Dictatorship.
Take
the industrial complex in Yangon as an example. It is where the resistance movement first started in earnest. The army and the police opened fire on the public from a high bridge, just like some firearms training. I can't believe how on earth this kind of situation ever happened.
It's extremely difficult to identify the current situation in Myanmar since the information of the protests and the voices of the people have been completely shut off under the heavy control of the media by the military junta. This is the only source we have to rely on, and yet there seems to be no doubt in the inhumane activities by the armed forces on its people. The tragedy began early morning of February 1st. Vehicles in black were spotted blocking the entry to the building of Myanmar's parliament. Soon, the country's military announced the coup, driven by their commander-in-chief, Defense Services Min Aung Hlaing.
We asked the President, Parliament, and Union Election Commission to solve the election voters list frauds, but they failed. That's why the military had to declare a state of emergency.
The military junta turned back the clock of Myanmar's democracy to 1962 when they first seized power. Since then, more than half a century of dictatorship ruled over the docile Buddhists, with its corruption rising and its economy down to devastation. Once the country of gold, Myanmar has fallen to one of the most impoverished nations on the planet.
Aung San Suu Kyi and the people of Myanmar have waited 25 years since the last free election in their country to get to this point today. And
in 2016, under her leadership, the National League for Democracy Party gave birth to a democratic government for the first time in the country's modern history. Last year, the party won an overwhelming victory in the general election, and Myanmar was just about to step into a single-party state, legitimately won by its people when the military overthrew the order. The junta announced the coup and declared a state of emergency, swiftly arresting and deposing key government officials and major political figures, including Aung San Suu Kyi. Currently residing in Myanmar, Chong Gi-hong, professor of Busan University of Foreign Studies, told us,
The repressive military regime in Myanmar has been in power for almost 70 years. Fear-mongering and polarization are the easiest and cheapest way for the military government to nip civil disobedience in the bud. Of course, compared to other previous democratic movements, such as the 2007 Saffron Revolution, people in Myanmar are now more determined than ever to fight for democracy, which seems to get the military in a fluster. But as time passes, it will be the general public who will eventually suffer as a result of the growing gap between rich and poor.
After hearing the news of the coup, the people of Myanmar poured into the streets. It was the start of CDM, the Citizen Disobedience Movement. 3 fingers were raised, a salute for election, democracy, and freedom. Medical staff, teachers, workers, and public officials went on a general strike, and the resistance spread like wildfire. Like some kind of superheroes in movies, in Yangon, the largest city of Myanmar, spotlights were on the young protesters who were not losing their cool despite the indiscriminate oppression by the military and police. Their appearance quickly made its way to social media and attracted global attention. With men marching in short shirts and rubber bathtubs lined up along the road. These heroes, although seemingly slightly out of context, were the scene stealers of the democratization movement. They called themselves Generation Z in their 20s, of Myanmar's bright future. We asked the Burmese students in Korea about the unique protest culture of Generation Z.
Honestly, I was also surprised their unique protesting style and uniformity. They have creativity, boldness, solidarity, and sense of humor. They create unique costumes and banners all on display during protesting. All activity has the same objective, which is to deny the military dictatorship and to gain the attention from international society, hoping for foreign help.
Generation Z, they're considered a leading force in the Myanmar democratization movement. Born in the late 1990s, they grew up in a digital environment with social media. To them, using those platforms for communication or even bypassing the military censorship via VPNs is as easy as jotting things down on a memo pad. Through these powerful means, they are spreading the most up-to-date information about Myanmar global-wide, real-time. There is a song the young Burmese have chosen as their anthem to fight against the military junta. It's from the K-pop band BTS. Someday we might be defeated. The weak, the have-nots, but not today. Today we fight. The voices of the youth of Myanmar, with their yearning for democracy, echo with a BTS song throughout the globe. The characteristics of Myanmar's Generation Z include so-called digital natives or first generation of social networks. However, that's not all there is, and one should remember this one key word: liberty. After the 1980s democratic protest ended with failure, Myanmar's military regime virtually shut down all college courses. However, from 2014, including Yangon University, most colleges reopened and resumed their regular courses in a liberal atmosphere. Generation Z is the group that benefited from this unprecedented liberal environment as they grew up. For them, a military coup involving oppression and control is absolutely unacceptable, and their voice was met with the empathy of the youth around the world.
On the topic of Generation Z of Myanmar, I think these young people are very courageous for being the frontliners who drive the revolution. They are very creative with their tactics in fighting the military and letting their voices be heard. They're still quite young, but they know their place in society and how big their responsibilities are in nation building. It's really quite commendable.
I think not only Gen Z in Myanmar, but Gen Z around the world is sharing the sentiment to regain the narrative. We are different from our parents' generation in so many ways, like globalization is speeding, new technologies, new apps, the political agenda, and so on.
Using smartphones and social media as weapons, Generation Z stands at the forefront of the democratization movement. Myanmar's military blocked the internet to stop the flow of information, but it is of no use for Generation Z, the digital natives. They find a way to take a satellite image of the phrase such as, "We want democracy," scoffing at the government's internet blockage. Their digital fluency makes military control obsolete.
Actually, they might be scared of doing these things another can and the little weapon, but I'm sure they won't stop fighting. Stop fighting, that means surrendering democracy, surrendering our hope.
Then, what sets the democratization movement of Generation Z apart from their predecessors? Let's hear from Dr. Mong Jar-ni, co-founder of a Southeast Asia human rights organization, 4C.
This generation has been so exposed to international affairs, new ideas, new technologies, and so they don't have the kind of fear that my generation have.
Myanmar's present is very similar to Korea's history. Just as South Korea's modern history was stained by coups and military dictatorships, Myanmar's politics and economy dominated by the military regime. The two nations share a dark history. Myanmar's modern history is about people's constant struggle against the military regime.
Here in Southeast Asia, we see the potential for integration among nations and people.
In 2012, U.S. President Barack Obama took note of Myanmar's regime change, expressing his expectations for the newly established civilian government. At that time, while conducting nuclear negotiations with North Korea, President Obama, who had been calling for a change in North Korea, even encouraged to follow the path of Myanmar.
Cooperating to the leadership of North Korea, I've offered a choice. Let go of your nuclear weapons and choose the path of peace and progress. In
2016, with the overwhelming support of the citizens of Myanmar, the National League for Democracy Party, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, established a complete civilian government for the first time in 53 years. However, according to Myanmar's constitution stipulating that a person with a foreign spouse cannot become president, Aung San Suu Kyi could not take the presidential oath. The spark of conflict between the military and the people of Myanmar remained. In the general election of 2020, the National League for Democracy of Aung San Suu Kyi won an overwhelming victory. Everyone thought it was finally a chance for a single-party civilian government to be formed until another military coup took place. The tower of democracy that has been built for decades was put on the verge of collapsing. A 1-year-old child was hit by a rubber bullet and lost an eye. A 14-year-old girl was killed by live ammunition in her head. These are the horrible realities of Myanmar. The atrocities of the military and police are escalating day by day. What is it that the junta wants to achieve from all this? Behind the coup that turns back the clock of progress and brutal suppression by the country's military junta lies the greed of the men in power to not let go of what is in the grip. The political ambition of the commander-in-chief, who currently controls Myanmar's military, is also being blamed for the outbreak of a coup. So Mo Thu, a Burmese democratization activist who left his motherland and settled in Korea, says the military junta will not stop violent suppression.
Even the soldiers who work for them supported the civilian government, so they must have had to find something to justify themselves and stage a coup.
On 1st February 2021,
on February 26, when the civil disobedience movement spread due to the military coup, at a UN conference, Myanmar's ambassador, Cho Mo-tun, condemned the coup head-on.
Mr. President, at this important juncture, the continued and strong support from the international community is imperative for the people of Myanmar. We need further strongest possible action from the international community to immediately end the military coup, to stop oppressing the innocent people, to return the state power to the people, and to restore the democracy.
The next day, the Myanmar military dismissed Cho Mo-thun from the position of the UN ambassador of Myanmar. As the bloody suppression of the Myanmar democratization protest has continued for 3 months, the international community simultaneously voiced criticism. UN envoy Christine Schraner-Buggy called for the coalition of the international community through social media.
And many are wounded. So every tools available are needed now to stop this situation, and that we need now a unity of the international community. So it's
multiple countries, including the European Union and the UK, along with economic sanctions against Myanmar's military regime, announced the possibility for additional measures such as export controls. The South Korean government also lashed a strong condemnation against the junta and announced measures to take necessary actions in line with the international community. Although it is a dire situation for Myanmar that requires support from the international community, the UN Security Council is avoiding engagement. This situation is likely to continue because permanent members of the Security Council, China and Russia, with veto rights, are maintaining a lukewarm attitude. Those two superpowers are also deleting parts from the drafts of joint statements which might suggest the slightest possibility of conflict with their political or economic interests in regards to Myanmar. Gwangju City's International Relations Ambassador Yoon Yo-chol talks about the reason why the international community is not actively engaging.
The current international system is based on the principle of inviolability of sovereignty, which means that no other country can interfere with the internal affairs of a sovereign state. However, at the United Nations, the member states waiver this principle to the decisions of the Security Council. When the Council is divided, you can do nothing. The United States and Europe, as well as Korea, are condemning the acts of violence by Myanmar military and take sanctions. But China and Russia are betting that the military will continue their grip on power, and they are blocking the pressure measures on the pretext of stability and non-interference principle.
At the ASEAN Special Summit on April 24th, in the presence of Myanmar's Commander-in-Chief, Hyang, who initiated the coup, ASEAN leaders agreed on 5 agendas regarding the Myanmar situation, including the immediate cessation of violence and mediation by ASEAN members of states. But the agreement has been left as just a declaration, and in the process of negotiating specific provisions in the future, there is a good chance that it will be gridlocked. Another problem is that there's no way to force the military to implement the agreement. The local situation known through social media remains terrible. Despite the ASEAN arbitration agreement, Myanmar's military and police are using live ammunition against citizens, and violations of human rights, including torture and illegal detention, are still prevailing in the country.
A civil war could break out anytime soon. The UN peacekeeping force should intervene to keep it from happening. Otherwise, Myanmarese people have no choice but to pick up their weapons. If they really do, please don't misunderstand or blame them. It'd be a mistake for the international society to miss the opportunity to prevent war.
Currently, the Myanmar protesters are requesting the international community not admit to the legitimacy of the military regime, calling for a global coalition. Until the United Nations takes action, how many more deaths would be needed? A young Myanmar national who asked for help from the international community was killed by the country's military a day after posting that question. If the international community took more decisive actions, couldn't the worst situation like this be avoided, preventing many deaths, including the young male who asked for help?
또다시 60년간의
For 60 years, we went through a frightening and tough time under military dictatorship. Returning to the dark past when we had to struggle for 60 years is far more terrifying than the military's guns and swords. We should win this fight, or else the next generations would live in a terrible world. We'll definitely win this fight, and this should be the last fight.
In a situation where the United Nations' hands are tied, civic groups of each country first reached out a hand of solidarity, including Thailand, where the disobedience movement is still in progress after their own military coup, and the youths of Taiwan and Hong Kong put together their strength under the coalition called the Milk Tea Alliance. Civic group solidarity and fundraising campaigns are being held throughout South Korea to support Myanmar and the workers and students from Myanmar who are currently living in Korea. What the people of Myanmar need most now is the coalition, solidarity, and support of the international community. Despite the brutal oppression of the military, the resistance of the citizens of Myanmar continues. They will not give up this fight for democracy. To the desperate aspiration of the people of Myanmar for democracy, now is the time for us to answer the call.
We'll go as far as we can go. We will never give up this time. We will fight to the end.
We'll keep going. We are determined to take an active part in the protest until leader Aung San Suu Kyi and ruling party members are released.
Even if the bloody crackdown continues, we will not be intimidated. If we stop, we'll lose the real democracy we want. We have no choice but to protest because we will have to change our lives under the military dictatorship we are opposing.
Crumbles to the ground, though we refuse to see. Just